Welcome, everyone, back to the Kevin Creator Show. I am he. Thank you for joining us again. And today, my guest is Debbie Caudle. I first got connected with her through a Facebook group after a mutual friend said that I should talk to her. So it kind of worked out, serendipity, fate, or God, if you will. And but she's going to talk to us about marriage and a very important topic. I mean, marriage is probably the most important thing you do in this life in terms of relationship because it affects so many other aspects of your life. But we'll get into that. Debbie, welcome, and introduce yourself and kind of what you do.
Sure, Kevin. Thanks for having me, by the way. Yeah, so I am a licensed professional therapist and relationship coach, and I've been doing this a few years. I'm coming up on year 31 of doing
Okay.
this. And so yeah, I work specifically with Christian couples. And sometimes I see the wife alone. Sometimes I see them as a couple, and occasionally sometimes I work with men too. And I work with lots of other people and lots of other issues, but that's really my specialty.
Okay. And you have a podcast as well that I assume is about marriage.
I do. That's funny. I am like the worst networker of my own my own stuff. But yeah, I have a podcast. It's called The High Ticket Woman, which is all about helping women to raise their expectations for themselves in their life. So as they raise their expectations for themselves, their relationships improve. And I'm in my second season of this podcast. So this season, we are focusing specifically on high ticket relationships. So like specifically marriage. So yeah, it's fun. I enjoy doing it. I never, 5-10 years ago, if you had said, "Oh, Debbie, you'll be hosting a podcast," I probably would have been like, "What's a podcast?"
Yeah.
It's amazing how we morph and change as the world changes around us.
Yeah, it really is. So a lot of us probably would say the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so how did you get into counseling and this whole marriage world?
Well, I come from a long line of teachers, so that was my career path initially when I went to college. But I changed my major 2 or 3 times. But what ultimately got me on this path was in between my junior and senior year over the summer, I read this art therapy book, and I was so intrigued by this thing called art therapy that I came back my senior year and I just took every available psychology course that I could take. And that was the beginning of the beginning. And I remember telling my parents I was going to, start working on my master's in counseling. And they're like, "You're crazy. And you're going to have to work with people who don't share your values. And what if they come to you and, want to do something that you don't think is morally correct?" And I didn't have the answers at the time because I hadn't gone through any training. I just stood my ground and said, "I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out." And here I am, 31 years later, and this is my career. But it's funny, because I come from this long line of teachers, I have found my way back to sort of teaching because I have a very coaching perspective in the way that I work with people. In the counseling world, there's insurance and the medical model and the way that we view people as being disordered. I don't really like that model, and I'm moving away from it because I feel like I work with normal people with normal problems who are looking for real world solutions as opposed to diseased or disordered people, who need fixing in that sense.
Okay. Well, so the normal way would be that something's wrong with you. We need to fix it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like in the insurance world, a lot of therapists that's the path that, or the world that they work in. Insurance calls all the shots, right? Insurance says you have to have a mental health disorder in order to access your insurance. So that sets the tone for every therapeutic session, right? Like you have been given this label, this, medical diagnosis that insurance now pays for. So let's say if you want to come to me for marriage therapy, insurance doesn't pay for that. There is no, mental health disorder for, a broken marriage,
I
right?
see.
Or a marriage that's struggling. So now the therapist has to find something else in
Mm,
order to address the marriage. So one or the other spouse has to have an underlying disorder, anxiety or depression or, whatever it might be. And and even then there are procedural codes that tell insurance who's in the session. So if you are there with your spouse, I have to use this code. If you're there with me alone, I use a different code.
mm.
And insurance pays less if your spouse is there. A lot of times, most insurances pay less because they know, okay, you're addressing a different problem
Okay.
than if you were to see, this person has, well, we'll just say depression. You're treating them for depression, but you've got their spouse in there for all these appointments. So it's sort of like
Mm,
they punish you, right? They punish you as a
okay.
therapist. It's just, I mean, I don't want to, we don't want to get bogged down in the weeds of all this, but there are a
Sure.
lot of hoops and obstacles I think that insurance really throws up for both the individual who's wanting help and the person giving help. And I think it's a flawed system. And and I have intentionally moved myself away from it.
Oh, good for you. Yeah. We prefer, yeah, we could talk a lot about doctors
We
and
really
insurance.
could. We
Yeah,
really
we've
could.
moved
Yeah.
away from the traditional healthcare system as well as a family. So yeah, I sympathize with what you're saying there. Um, yeah, and to deal with it on your end as a provider, I can't imagine. Mm, all right, so let's get into a few questions here.
Sure, sure.
Uh, so us in America or the West are brought up with a lot of stories. And especially in America, we have Disney, and you have this fairy tale, a lot of times a fairy tale story, and this idea that there's one perfect person for you, and that
Mhm.
there's one out there, and you got to find them. And if you don't, you may not have a very good life. And a lot of people think they found their soulmate, but of all the people in the world, let's say there is a perfect person for each person. The idea that you live next to them and find them is pretty low. So
Yeah,
the
sure.
this whole idea of there's a perfect person out there for me, I think that's done a lot of damage to marriage in general, because love to me is as much of or more of an action rather than a feeling. So
Mhm.
talk to that, love being a feeling versus maybe a way of thinking or treating someone or a decision.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, there's so much to that, right? So you're right. We have sort of this idealized, romanticized idea of what, what marriage looks like, and that inhibits people, right, from really giving another person a chance,
Mm,
right? Because that person doesn't meet that initial ideal. I always tell people you should have the ideal relationship in mind, but you should not have the ideal person in mind. Because we get really hung up on, well, this person doesn't meet my ideal characteristics. No, you need to be focusing on, like, what does your ideal relationship look like? But yeah, what you're saying is true. I think here's the challenge. Look, there's over 8 billion people in the world, right? So if you've only got one person, good luck. Because what if your person lives, clear on the other side of the world and you're never going to meet? The reality is that there are certain things that you should be looking for in terms of compatibility. So one of the key things, I always say there's 4 things that you have to have before you really have a committed relationship. You've got to have chemistry. There's got to be that initial spark of attraction. Although if that's missing initially, it can grow. So it doesn't have to be the first thing that you notice, right? Sometimes
yeah.
we dismiss somebody because we didn't feel all, giddy inside. It can grow, but it does have to be present at some point. You've got to have connection. So you got to have fun with this person. You've got to like being around them. You've got to enjoy conversation and spending time with them. The third thing you need is compatibility. And compatibility takes time to discern. You cannot know if somebody is truly compatible with you after days, weeks, or even a handful of months. Because when you figure out if someone's compatible with you, you're looking at their value system and whether it aligns with yours, their decision making, you know, how how they interact with other people, how they spend their money, what they
Mhm.
look like when they get angry, how they handle conflict, how they treat people, friends, family, strangers, and that's based on day-to-day interactions, right?
Mhm.
So, and there's no replacement for time. So the longer you spend getting to know someone, the more you see that compatibility or lack thereof. There are way too many people who jump into a relationship because of those early giddy feelings, right? That in love phase, which everybody goes through multiple times, often in their lives. But whether there's anything sustainable, that takes time. And then the fourth thing that you have to have is you have to have timing, right? You can have a fun time with somebody, sparks can fly, you can have the attraction. There may even be, compatibility, but if one person isn't ready to settle down and be in a committed relationship and the other person is, it's still not going to work out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hmm. So those are four things that you need. You need at least, probably three of them to get started at least. Um,
Yeah.
I Yeah, I heard a statistic earlier this week that it takes, I think, people don't find their spouse. It takes like 3.8 tries on average. Someone goes through almost four attempts to find the right person. So
Yeah.
yeah, it does take time.
I made the mistake. I I'll tell my own story on me. I made the mistake of thinking that I had found my perfect person. I was 25 years old and I was finishing up grad school and I remember praying to God, God, here I am. I'm 25. I'm about to finish my master's. I really feel like I'm in this phase of my life where I'm ready to get married. So, if it's your will, I would like to be married by the end of next year. And this was December of 93. A week later, I met the man that was going to become my husband. And we had the chemistry, or well, we were actually just friends for about 4 months. I just thought he was a fun person. We had the connection. The
Mm.
chemistry came later. So we had the connection. He was a lot of fun and easy to talk to. The chemistry grew out of that. And I fell in love with the idea of being married to this man. But he was very, very different from me. We had grown up with different backgrounds. We were in the same church, so we had some core values together, but culturally and socioeconomically, we were very different. He had a high school degree. I was finishing grad school. And there were multiple other differences that I essentially talked myself out of, thinking these are going to be serious problems. And I thought that because I had met him and because he wanted me, that this was God's answer to my prayer. And through all the years of our marriage, which we almost made it to 24 years before the divorce was finalized, but in all of those years before it really just came to an end, I kept hanging on to the relationship because I kept thinking, this was my answered prayer. This is what, I prayed to God. I said I wanted to be married a year later. I was married December 28th of the following year. So all of that time I thought this was God saying, Debbie, he's the one for you. And when that marriage ended, it took me a long time to realize that I chose this person not because this was the person that God had chosen for me. I chose this person because I was afraid. I was afraid I was never going to find anybody else. And that seems silly to say now, knowing that I was only 25,
Yeah.
but I had gone to a private Christian college where everybody was getting paired up and getting married at the end of their senior year. And,
Hmm.
here's Debbie, and she's got nobody. And then, a year goes by and another years go by and another year goes by and nobody's interested in Debbie. And you start to have that conversation in your head of like, what if there is nobody? And so then this guy comes along, and my ex-husband, I was his second wife, and he had a child. So I mean, I had family trying to talk me out of this right from the day one, but I wasn't listening to anybody. I
Mm.
thought, no, this is my person. I know now that it was fear that was driving that decision.
Oh,
Yeah.
hmm. Yeah, you see that a lot. I was
Yes.
married, unfortunately. I was married when I was 29, and
Mhm.
my wife's a bit younger than me, and so I was starting to have some of those thoughts as well.
Same doubts. Yeah.
And the same thing. I went to a private Christian college, and people were getting married, and even before they graduated, and I'm over there like, well, it didn't happen, and so boy, hmm, it's hard because yeah, you have to try, right? You have to try
Yeah.
and get married. Rarely will someone just come along and say we're getting married, and that is not the
Yeah.
ideal.
I mean,
But
if you want to be married, yeah, you have to put
yes,
yourself out there
yeah.
and you have to make effort. Yeah.
But then you don't want to like choose, if I
Yeah.
can use quotes, the wrong person. Well, thank you for sharing your story
Yeah.
there. How do you counsel then young people, if you counsel young people who are
Mhm.
or in your position that you were, where they're wanting to get married but just hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, actually that happens a fair amount. I've got a number of single people that I am working with right now. And what I really try to instill in them is, first and foremost, you have to value yourself, and you have to be comfortable in your own skin. You have to honor you have to have self-respect. So you have to honor your own um, boundaries and your own needs, and never ever settle.
Mm,
It's better for you to have a relationship with yourself that's healthy and a relationship with God that's healthy. And even though you may be lonely at times, to learn to be in that space and not pick somebody out of fear or neediness or loneliness, because the chances are you are going to compromise or settle. The healthier you are in that sense, the better you're going to attract somebody who also is healthy too. I mean, confidence is, if I can say, confidence is attractive. Confidence is sexy. So when you are making a decision to be with somebody out of insecurity or fear, that is not attractive. That's coming from a place of neediness.
mm, yeah. Mm. Yeah, it can be very hard. I have some single uh, friends, my wife and I do, and they're well into their 30s, and
Yeah.
man, it's hard, but they are in that position where they've made the decision, I'm not going to settle, and so
Right.
yeah, you got to respect that. Boy, it's it's not easy.
It's hard. But I tell people who are, because I've got some people who are in their 30s who are in that space too. I tell them, look, don't hit pause on your life, right?
Mm,
Build a life that you are excited to wake up to every single day. Don't wait for that perfect man or that perfect woman, air quotes around perfect, but that person that you're dreaming of. Don't wait for them to show up to start living your life. So what do you want your life to look like, professionally, personally, socially, spiritually? What skill would you learn that you would love to learn if you had a partner? Salsa dancing. Okay, go take salsa dancing lessons.
mhm,
Drag a friend with you. Take that cooking class. Travel. Don't be afraid to do the things that you are waiting to have a partner to do. Because what if you don't find that person? What if God's answer for you is no,
mm,
or not yet? And I mean, I've known people who, didn't get married till they were in their 50s or 60s. It's, you just don't know. And then some people are single their whole lives. And, I would love for everybody to meet, the love of their life. But I don't have any magic wands left in my, desk drawer, unfortunately,
you
or I
used
would
them
be
all up.
retired because I used them all up. And, yeah. So no magic wands here. So build the life that you really want to live right now. And again, that also that changes your mindset and that changes your energy level. Because if you're excited to get up every day and go do whatever is on your agenda for today, for this week, for this month, you're interacting with the world very differently than if you are scared, if you
Mhm.
are anxious, if you are angry. I mean, I know people who are angry with God because, God, why haven't you blessed me with somebody? I've been praying and praying and praying, and, I've done everything right that I know to do, and why don't I have my person? Well, that anger also radiates a certain kind of energy. Yeah, you're nodding. And that detracts from
Mm.
your attractiveness, right?
Yeah.
That takes away. They are pushed away by that kind of energy.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. You need to be, uh, let's say, hmm, maybe not worthy, but at least desirable and attractive for someone else. And if you're kind of an angry person and you're kind of gloomy, like, let's just be real. People don't want to be around that, even though you may be a great person. You may be
Yeah.
someone that that guy over there really could marry and fall in love with. If you don't look like you're having kind of a good time or a nice person, he's not even going to approach you. So, but that is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is hard, but that season of being alone and being single is also a fantastic opportunity to really get to know yourself. And I like to use the metaphor when it comes to finding somebody of like buying a house. So imagine that you're looking for a house and your real estate agent takes you to this one house and it's gorgeous. It's everything you ever dreamt of, right? Perfect landscaping, the layout, floor plan is beautiful. The view is spectacular, but you step into this house and you're already beginning to think, I don't know, maybe this is too much for me, right? So then you ask to be taken to another house, but the next house is this falling down wreck, right? And the neighborhood is a little bit, questionable. The weeds are up to the waist and the doors hanging off the hinges and the roof leaks and the windows are cracked. And you're thinking, why would my real estate agent think this is what I want? Until she tells you the price. And then you go, oh, well, okay, maybe this will work. I can, coat a paint, I can patch up the roof, I can do this. Except now you're not really actually buying a house, you're picking your person.
Hmm.
And that turnkey person isn't perfect, but they're the person who's done that interior remodeling, right? They've taken that season of being alone and they've looked inwards to go, okay, what do I know about myself that's good, that's bad, that's not so great? What are the patterns that I keep seeing in my past relationships? What are the dysfunctions from my childhood? What do I need to change about me so that the next relationship is healthy versus the fixer upper that no matter how much you love them, you cannot do that interior remodeling for them.
Hmm.
You can't love them into a state of healthiness, right? So now the reality of being in that relationship is that, yeah, the roof is leaking and I'm getting wet and the wind is blowing through the cracked windows and I'm freezing cold. And this feels very emotionally unsafe to
Hmm.
be in this relationship. And I see that all the time. People are either connecting with someone who's really in a fixer upper sort of state and they have done a lot of work on themselves, so they're in a much healthier place, but they're pairing with somebody who's not, or they themselves are still in that fixer upper mode and they're not ready to be in a relationship yet.
Yeah, sometimes you're not ready yet, and you need to know
Sometimes
that.
you're just
Yeah.
not ready. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, so yeah, that's all good information there about people who aren't married, and hopefully that'll help someone. But let's talk about some habits maybe that married people do,
Sure.
or maybe they shouldn't do, but we still do. I think anyone who has been married has heard the phrase "you always," followed
Oh,
by "duh, duh, 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 duh." Um, your thoughts on that?
oh, okay. Yeah. You know what? I talk about this a lot. Yeah. These are, I call these inflammatory words. You, always, never, and why. and they get paired up in this way. Why do you always dot dot dot, or why do you never dot dot dot? And the problem with those kinds of words is that they instill blame. When you're on the receiving end of those words, it's like you've been verbally backed up into a corner, right? When an animal is backed into a corner, what do? Right? They lash out, they attack. And that's what we do as humans. If we feel defensive, if we feel like we've been attacked, we tend to counterattack. So we're going to come back with words of like, well, you do that too, or
Mm.
you're wrong. That's not what happened. And so now, instead of the conversation being solution based or solution oriented, it dissolves into, well, who's more right than the other person?
Mm.
Right? We're just attacking each other. So yeah, that's why, those words inflame a problem. What I tell people to do instead, I'm a big believer in the I statement format, right? Like if you've got a problem with somebody or your spouse in this case, the best way to approach that problem is to own the fact that you have the problem, right? So it's better to say, honey, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling concerned, I'm feeling ignored when this behavior happens. Let me give you an example. Let's say that my husband, my husband now, let's say that every time he gets out of the shower, he, leaves his wet towel on the floor. And I've tried everything to get him to pick up the wet towel, right? I've asked nicely, I've cried, I've gotten angry, and every time he's like, I know, I'm gonna do that. I'm sorry, right? Because that's what he would say, because he's a super nice guy. But I keep walking into the bathroom and there's the wet towel on the floor, right? So how am I going to talk to him about this problem in a way that really gets a different kind of result? Well, I need to use that I statement format. Instead of saying, you never listen to me, you always leave your wet towel on the floor. What's wrong with you? I've told you 1,001 times to please pick up that towel, right? Okay, that's not working. Let's say hypothetically, I've tried that over and over and it's still happening. The best way for me to approach that is to say, honey, I'm feeling disrespected and a little bit ignored when I walk into the bathroom and I'm still seeing a wet towel on the floor. Now, notice I didn't say you anywhere in there so far. I've left the word you out. I've said how I felt and I've described the behavior. Then I go on to explain why that behavior is causing me to feel ignored and disrespected. So I might say, because this is something that I've brought up a number of times, and yet it keeps happening. So I can't help but think that what I'm asking doesn't seem to matter. Now, I still haven't used the word you. Sometimes this isn't possible, but in this
Yeah.
scenario, it is possible. I leave the word you out. And then the final piece, which is really, really key, is I have to ask for the change that I'm looking for. Now, sometimes that warrants some sort of like consequence that I put in place. Sometimes there's already a consequence that's sort of happening. So I'm going to point that out. In this case, I might say something like, look, from here on out, I'm not going to pick up the towel. I've been doing that, and I realized that I've probably been creating this. I've been enabling this problem because there's no motivation for you to pick up your towel. I'm doing it for you. So I'm not going to do that anymore. What I am going to do is I'm going to take that wet towel and I'm going to throw it back in the bathtub, or I'm going to put it behind the bathroom door, or I'm going to put it in the cupboard, one of those. And if you wonder why you're running out of clean towels, dry towels, that's why. Okay. So I've now put in a logical consequence that fits that situation. But I could also say, as a natural consequence, I could say, look, because this has been happening for a while, I'm really struggling to trust what you say, because I've been told a number of times that this is going to change and it's not. And this is eroding my trust. And this is something that I really need you to know because this is serious. So either I have a logical consequence or I'm pointing out something that is naturally happening, but it's really, really important for me to say something is happening or going to happen as a result if this behavior doesn't change. But nowhere in that have I said you always, never, or why.
Mm. Yeah, that's really good. Those are tools, you know,
They
as
are tools. Yes.
if you're married, you learn tools to use
Yes.
because marriage is something that takes effort. And y- I think a lot of people, including myself, I think when you get married, you think, okay, now I'm married. Now I'm here. And
I've arrived.
yeah, yeah. It's like,
It's the destination. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, I don't, now I'm done. And you can kind of relax. And I'm like, if I could just tell myself, 16 years ago, like, dude, you have no idea. You have
You have
no
no idea.
clue.
Yeah.
Like, you're just
The
getting started.
journey has just begun. That's right.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
because, like, there's all this stuff you don't know until you are forced to know it and confront it, and tools
Yeah.
like you just
Yes.
gave are things that you can use, and it's okay to use these little hacks in your marriage.
Yes.
You're not, like,
Yeah.
cheating because you have to find a way to talk to people, and
Not
you're
only
like
is it okay, it's necessary,
yeah,
right? I mean, I can't tell you how many people come to me and their marriage is dangling off the cliff edge, right? But, barely hanging on. And some of these simple, basic, as you say, life hacks really turn their relationship around. So there
mm,
are foundational tools that I give every couple, and then we build on that, right? There are so many. I'm a very tools based coach. I'm not one of these therapists or coaches that you come to and I let you just sit in front of me and vent about each other and complain about their problems. And I'm just sitting there listening, going, that's interesting. What do you think about that? How do you feel? No, we're diving right in there to identify the problems and, you know, and implement the tools and we're role playing the tools and there's homework, there's specific things that I'm giving my couples to work on that really helps to transform their relationship.
mm. I like to hear that. Yeah, and don't, for anyone listening, don't be ashamed that you need a little help, this is life, we all need some
Absolutely.
help.
You know what they say, research wise? They say that most couples wait 6 years too long to get help.
Oh, wow.
And
I
that's
believe that.
true. I believe that because I see that a lot. Like I always love it when a couple comes to me who are being very proactive because they started to see, a few little things pop up in their marriage and they want to, address that right away. And I call myself the metaphor queen. So here I go with another metaphor, but it's like planting a garden. When you're dating, you're spending so much time picking out the perfect garden plot and tilling the land and going and buying flowers and fertilizer and watering, and then this beautiful garden grows up, right? You've got this amazing relationship. And then, first few weeds pop up. And so you're diligently picking out the weeds. But then, you get a little lazy and the stressors of day-to-day life, get woven into that. And then there's that first moment when you realize that your partner isn't perfect and that all the things that you loved about them, there's a flip side to that,
Mm,
sometimes those things are annoying, sometimes they're not. So the weeds get a little bigger, a little taller, but the garden overall still looks, it's decent, looks beautiful. So we're not tending to the weeds until all of a sudden, and sometimes it can come on like that. All of a sudden, where's the garden? All I
mm,
see are weeds. And now we're going to therapy. Now we're reaching out for a professional. But unfortunately, what's going on in that situation is one or the other has probably flipped the relationship switch to off.
hmm,
And they're just going through the motions to say they tried.
hmm. What do you mean they've flipped their relationship switch to off? What is that like?
Well, it's what you said earlier about is love a feeling or is love a choice. I mean, when
Mm,
you make a commitment to marriage, I mean, divorce is so easy now, right? It used to be really complicated, you know, decades and decades of years ago. It was complicated to get a divorce, and there was a lot of societal shame and guilt to
mm,
getting divorced. But the opposite is true now. Everybody is saying, if you're not happy, leave. You don't have to stay in a relationship where you're not happy. So we say we're committed until it gets really difficult, and or we're chasing after that initial feeling. And when the day-to-day life settles in and that feeling has shifted to, oh, this, some days this is harder than other days, then we we stop choosing to show up in the relationship.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that can definitely happen and it can happen automatically almost too if you just stop trying. Yeah. So this is from a post of yours on social media, and it intrigued me. What characterizes a marriage built on leftovers?
Yeah. Okay. Well, most marriages, go from being, husband and wife to adding children to the family, right? And when you have kids, it's not always kids, but a lot of times it is children. When you have children and they are young, their needs often take top priority, especially for women, right? It's very exhausting and very draining to be a new mom and to have young children underfoot. And so what happens sort of naturally is that the marriage begins to take a bit of a back seat because the children need so much of you. And if you are not intentional about your time and your energy and your time and your energy, a lot of the attention that your marriage got before children gets shifted over to your children. And some husbands they're very understanding about that, so they may not be saying much, right? But somewhere inside of them, they're wondering, my emotional needs, my physical needs, some of my needs are not being met, but they're maybe not verbalizing that. Other men maybe verbalizing that because, every relationship is different. But again, new metaphor, a family, if you think about building a house, the marriage is the foundation of your family, okay? And what you build on that is only as stable as the foundation. So if you don't attend to your marriage after having children, and there are cracks that are beginning, or, back to the garden metaphor, weeds, but if there are cracks in the foundation, then the stability of the home is compromised. This is why one of the reasons why God says he hates divorce, right? Because it's so deeply damaging to the family structure. And we see this all over society. We see families that have just been blown apart, and we see the the damage of divorce that goes down beyond that generation, right?
Hmm.
Like it goes on to 2 or 3 generations or more,
Yeah.
right? Depending on someone's, intention to change that legacy. So that's what I mean when I say leftovers. If your children are getting the the most of your energy, and sometimes it's not children, sometimes it's your career. Okay.
Mm.
There are a lot of career driven women too, right? Because we live in this age of women can do anything, the feminist movement and female empowerment. So we've got a lot of women who are very, very invested in their careers. And so your job now gets 8+ hours of your day. So what does your husband get? Well, he gets whatever's left over. And I mean, the same could be true for a man, right?
Yeah.
What does
Hmm.
your wife get? What do you, as a man, what do your kids get? They get the leftovers. So you have to be very intentional about how you show up, even though your wife or your husband and your kids may not be getting the quantity of hours of your waking day. You have to show up with intention in those times that you do have with them, as opposed to coming home and being on your phone or being in front of the TV or being in front of your computer or running another thing that I see a lot that I think is so detrimental to families are kid-centered homes, right? Instead of God-centered homes, where
Mm.
everything is around what the kids are doing and all their activities. And it really robs couples from being able to have connection time, because we got to drive little Jimmy over to soccer practice, and we got to take little Susie to piano lessons. And so you're going this way and I'm going that way. And now these days, That's virtually 3, 4, 5 nights of the week. So where is time for the marriage?
Mhm.
And that's why the metaphor of leftovers.
Yeah, that can be easy to happen without noticing it.
Yeah,
Yeah, because life happens. Yeah, you've got the kids
yeah,
got this, and
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
we're getting to that stage where we are probably the busiest we've ever been, and
Right.
my oldest is just a teenager now, and um, it's just yeah, life happens, and if you don't aren't intentional
You are
about your
intentional.
marriage, just like anything, it will fall by the wayside. You know, I could not be intentional about my yard, but it's going to
That's
look
right.
pretty bad if I don't pay attention to it
That's
pretty
right.
soon.
A- And how quickly do we stay on top of, oh, the yard needs mowed. So we're out there because we care what people think. But we don't always apply the same attention to our marriage because the changes to our marriage are gradual. They're
Mm,
not, it's not like we wake up one day and go, oh my goodness, my
yes.
marriage is falling apart. We don't see that.
Yeah. It's the oh, who is that author? An American author. He went bankrupt and people asked him how it happened and he said slowly, 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 then all at once.
Slowly, yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens in marriages. And a lot of times, I think women are often the first ones to be aware of that.
Mm,
And they may be complaining. They may be complaining to their husband that there are problems. But unfortunately, sometimes the way we as women show up and ask for what we want and need is the exact opposite of how we should be approaching our husband. You know, nagging, complaining, pointing out flaws, all of that does is it really makes a man feel like nothing he does is good enough. It's very emasculating, and it's either going to make a man shut down or it's going to make a man angry.
mm,
What it doesn't do is make a man want to try harder. Maybe initially, but over time, that sort of drip, drip, drip of I'm focusing on your flaws, I'm focusing on the things I'm not happy about. It turns a man away. And now you tell me if I'm wrong. Yeah,
I
you're
cannot
shaking
tell
your
you
head. I'm
I
not
cannot tell
wrong.
you
I'm
you're
not
wrong.
wrong.
Yeah. Well, again, it's knowing how to talk to your spouse. And my wife and I have learned we're still learning, especially me, how to properly communicate things that we need to say. You know,
Yeah,
like the example you gave of the towel, you know, that's hard. It
yes.
takes time and practice,
It
and
does.
you can do it
It does.
right for years and then do it wrong one day, and then it's, you know, it's a bad day. But well, this has been good. Go ahead.
It's a bad day, but it's not now a bad marriage, right? Because you
Mm,
have years and years and years of showing up for each other and demonstrating over and over through words and actions that we love each other, we're committed. So you can get through a bad day. That's
yes.
okay. It happens.
Yeah. What are some other tips and tools you use in your practice? You gave us one earlier about the, you know, using the certain words or not using certain words. Do you have any
I
other
say,
tools?
yeah. When couples work with me, we're going to learn how to really listen, how to use active listening. We're going to learn how to understand what your partner is saying, not out loud but implied. How to clarify what you're really hearing instead of just jumping to conclusions and making assumptions. Um, we're going to learn how to talk about problems that never really get resolved. We're going to talk about how to use, like, when the best time to talk about a problem is versus when to step away and take a healthy time out. We're going to talk about personality styles and how those play out in the way that we communicate. There's so many different things that I bring into this process to bring awareness to the marriage. You know, I mean, we do things out of habit, and some of those habits we brought into the marriage and we're not even aware of. So part of the process is just shining a spotlight on your habit versus her habit, but they are bumping up against each other. Yeah,
Yeah. Interesting. Very cool. Um, I think we covered a lot. Is there anything you think that
I
we need to
think
go
so.
over that I haven't brought up?
Well, I mean, I could talk for hours, Kevin. That's a loaded question,
Gotcha.
but no, I think what I really want people to know is that I try to show up very differently than maybe the average therapist or coach in that if anybody Googles me and sees me on social media, they'll know that I try to offer a lot of tips and tools um, as freebies. And I have a private Facebook group. It's called Relationship Resolution, and people can join that group. I go live usually about every 2 weeks, and people submit me questions ahead of time,
Hmm.
and they are answered anonymously so that, there's no breaching of confidentiality. These questions don't, these people don't have to be my clients. They can just, I don't even have to have met them. They can just DM me a question. And I mean, the questions are all over the map. Like tomorrow, I've got a couple questions. One of them is about my partner. I'm noticing my partner is drinking a lot more than I'm comfortable with. And I've tried talking with them about it, and my partner gets really defensive. Now what? So I'm going to go on live tomorrow and answer that question.
Hmm.
So people can ask me anything. I mean, and that's a free resource. So, and I do that because it's hard sometimes to know out there, like before we spend money, on therapy or coaching, how do I know this is really going to work? Like, how do I know this is a good fit for me? So maybe I've already spent X number of dollars before I can make a decision. I want people to know what they're going to get with me, to see my style, how I answer things, what my value system is, where I'm coming from. I give a lot of tools. I mean, I just gave you one right there. I give a lot of tools as free resources. Even on my website, I have a lot of free resources. Um, because I don't think I'm never going to run out of things to say and share. And there's always going to be a percentage of people who never go beyond the free resources. But if I reach one person who says, I need to work with Debbie, Debbie has the answers I'm looking for, and my marriage is worth saving, and it's worth whatever I have to invest in this process. That's the person I'm looking for. That's the person I want to work with.
Gotcha. Well said. Well, what's the best way, or how do you want people to get a hold of you if they want to?
Sure. So the best way is, I guess, through my website, debbiecaudle.com. And my phone number's there. My email is there. People can reach out to me directly that way. And if they don't remember how to get to the private Facebook group, they can contact me that way, and I will hook them up with everything that they want that's free. And if they want more than that, we can talk about that too. And I do a free consult. So,
Hmm.
People, don't be shy, guys. If you got problems and you're not sure what it's going to look like to work with me, give me a call. I have sort of what I call like a tiered sort of system. I've got some inexpensive ways to work with me, all the way up to, pretty darn expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you're getting a whole lot more up at that level as well.
Yeah, get what you pay for. Yeah. Great.
That's right.
Well, I'll link to whatever you want me to link to down below so people can get a hold of you if they
Sure.
want to. And
Awesome.
very good info. I appreciate you coming on and sharing such good info about one of the most important things that a human can do is have
Yes.
a good marriage. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
no
It's been a
problem.
lot of
Thank
fun.
you.